Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. This is the space where we bring you Black America's headline news, views, and opinions. I'm Romeo.
I'm Brooke.
I'm Demi.
Peace and love. I'm Nielle.
All right, coming up today on today's show, the verdict is in. The 3 defendants charged with killing Ahmaud Arbery are now convicted murderers. We'll give you the full details.
Plus, Amazon worker plans another strike this Black Friday and find out who's making the best pizza in Philadelphia.
Soulmates, we have that and so much more. You know why? Because it's our voice and it's our truth. So let's get to it.
Good evening, Soulmates. Thank you for joining us here on this Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, and we have an incredibly big story to break down for you. Travis McMichael, his father Gregory McMichael, and their neighbor William Roddy Bryan Jr. are all now convicted murderers, all 3 convicted of felony murder amongst other charges in the death of Ahmaud Arbery, what we can now officially call the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Arbery, a 25-year-old black man, he was jogging through a Georgia neighborhood last year. Take a look at this.
Jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. I'm going to ask that whoever just made an outburst be removed from the court, please. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Dated this 24th day of November, 2021, signed by the foreperson.
I mean, you heard it there. The jury found Travis McMichael, by the way, the shooter in this incident, this murder. They found him guilty on all 9 counts he was charged with. Each of the 3 defendants were charged with 9 counts, including multiple felony murder counts, malice murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and criminal intent to commit a felony. Travis found guilty of all 9 counts. His father, Gregory McMichael, found guilty of 8 counts. Their neighbor, William Roddy Bryan, found guilty of 6 counts. Again, all of them found guilty of multiple felony murder counts. They face a mandatory minimum of life in prison. The death penalty is still a penalty within some of these counts in the state of Georgia. And, just want to point out that this is not the last trial. These 3 men also still face federal charges. They face federal hate crime and federal kidnapping charges for Ahmaud Arbery's murder. They have all pleaded not guilty in federal court and will stand trial. It is set to begin in February of next year.
Yeah. Soulmates, joining us now to discuss the verdict is civil rights attorney Carl Douglas. Welcome back to the Black Report.
Thanks for having me back again.
Oh, we're in sync with our colors, I see. Mm-hmm. Today is a good day for Black America. Talk to us about your thoughts of the verdict.
Well, initially when I heard that there was a verdict so early in the day, I thought it was going to be a conviction. The facts were pretty open and shut. There was a video that showed much of what happened. And after I heard the verdicts being rendered, I thought that they were absolutely perfect verdicts. They were reasoned, they were measured, and the verdicts were supported by both the facts and the law. And that's really all that any person looking at justice, this search for justice, can only ask for, that the verdicts be supported by the facts and the law, which was clear in this case.
So I want to make sure that we remind everyone that it took 74 days before this case, after his killing, for this case to be brought to trial. And so seeing his mother in the courtroom sort of break down what happens now, what happens after this with the Black community, what do we do after this? Yes, this is some form of justice, but what can the Black community do, next steps to kind of ensure that this doesn't happen?
Well, we have to stay vigilant. And we have to continue to stay active. You remember, even though there was a video here, there was still tension. And in this case, the jury did what the jury should have done. The law that the defendants tried to use was a relic from slavery days, from the 1860s. And it only was last year that the legislator in Georgia repealed that law. So there is still a long ways to go before full justice will ever be realized.
Attorney Carl Douglas joins us here on FOXSOUL's Black Report. Thank you for taking out the time. As a Black man in this country, I saw what happened in 1991 with video footage of Rodney King, what happened during the 90s. I saw what happened with George Floyd. And then we also saw what recently happened to Kyle Rittenhouse. That gave us a little uncertainty about how this trial would turn out. Were you a little nervous after you knew that verdict came out, how this verdict would actually come out?
When I was confident that there was at least one African American on that jury, I thought there would never be an acquittal. At worst, perhaps a hung jury, because that one Black person would hold out for justice. When I saw how quickly the verdict had been rendered, and considering that there were 27 different counts, that said to me there was a conviction, because it's much easier, given the facts of this case, to have a conviction on these facts than not guilty. But still, I was uncertain, and I was still ill at ease. And that shows how far we still have to go in this country, even with the video. In California, we happen to have something called the Right to Record Act, where you have the right to stay away, but to record the interactions of the police, and they cannot prosecute you, and they cannot stop you from doing that. We see how valuable videos have played, and we wonder what might have happened had there not been even 30 seconds of video of Ahmaud Arbery's demise.
Carl, I want to ask you, obviously from a legal perspective, what type of impact do you think Travis McMichael testifying possibly had on the jury on this case? Because, this all started with Travis McMichael saying to his attorneys that he felt this was a life or death situation. But then under cross, he admitted that he pointed his weapon at Arbery, that he never saw Arbery armed during the pursuit, never heard Ahmaud Arbery verbally threaten him, and Arbery never responded or even showed any interest with speaking with the McMichaels in this. What type of impact do you think that had on this case?
Brooke, I think the best piece of evidence for the prosecution was the testimony of McTavish, because his version of what happened was so riddled with inconsistencies, was so inconsistent with the law. The fact that he never thought or mentioned the word citizen's arrest when speaking to the officers, that was something that his lawyers came up with after the fact. The fact that the jury wanted to not only see the video 3 different times, but hear Dad's 911 call, that there's a Black man running. That's all that he thought was the emergency, a Black man running. And that's going to be very crucial to the pending federal trial that's going to start next February.
Attorney Douglas, I want to talk to you about juror selection. There's a big conversation happening right now about being judged by your peers. And we know with the Rittenhouse, a lot of Americans feel like justice was not served by him being found not guilty because of the makeup of the jurors. And we see in this case, like you said, there was one Black person, so we knew that we would get some justice. But do you think our country needs to re-examine how we select jurors so that it would be fairer to people that are on trial? And when you say we're being judged by our peers?
The right to a trial by one's jury of one's peers is what makes America great. We are the only country in the world that leaves matters of guilt or innocence to individuals. In England, you have it for certain civil cases, but only in America do we give that to human beings. That is good and that is bad, but it is what makes our country great. In America, we think it is better that 9 people who are guilty be found not guilty than 1 innocent person be convicted. So the scales of justice are balanced to protect the defendant, and that is something that we hold dear. It's important to realize in the Rittenhouse trial, because I'm aware of people who would second guess the jury in the O.J. Simpson trial 26 years ago, but there were only 12 people that heard every question in the Rittenhouse trial, that saw every piece of evidence. And the prosecution in that case was clearly flawed in many clear respects. So I understand the frustrations, but as a lawyer, as a defense lawyer, I can also understand how the verdict in the Rittenhouse case, not that he was innocent, but that the prosecution had failed to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Staying in line with where we're at right now, as a lawyer, how fearful are you? We saw with Rittenhouse's case and with this as well, a very small sprinkle of jurors of color, like Neil was saying. How fearful are you going into cases knowing that there's a small chance, because we don't have anyone, if you're defending someone of color, that, you know, if the makeup of the jury could literally go the opposite direction because of the makeup of the jury, having like a small sprinkle of.
That's a fabulous question. And whenever I have a chance to speak to listeners of color, I always stress 2 things. 1, the importance of registering to vote, because that's how they select people for jury service. And 2, when that jury summons comes, to take it and go and report to court. It is so very vital that there be Black and brown people that sit on juries as well, so that they can provide balance, because defendants of all colors need balance. People will think of any reason to avoid jury service. And I say, whenever I can, we Black and brown lawyers need Black and brown people to come and serve on a jury, and you will become a better citizen as a result.
You are so right, and I am a young man that at once was against going to jury. I would frown up. Now I embrace it, and I think all of us should definitely do that moving forward. So I want to say this: I heard Reverend Al Sharpton talk after the announcement was made, after the verdict came through, and he said, from Trayvon Martin's situation to now, that things have gotten better. Do you feel that way? Can we take our foot off the brake, or do we still need to be nervous, even for the next 2 trials coming up for these 3 men?
Bro, that journey of justice is a long one, and it is filled with many steps. This is just one step, but there is still a long ways to go. Because when you look at what's going on in Wisconsin, for example, when you look at how we were still very concerned before hearing those 9 guilty verdicts rendered, when you see that people are partying and celebrating simply because what we all saw should have happened did happen, it says to me that we as Americans still have a long ways to go. So we still have to remain vigilant, and we still have to remain active and carry on the fight.
You know, Carl, I want to ask you, because we're having a conversation here about, the need for Black jurors. We're having a conversation about, race and how that affected this trial, where the part that race played in this trial. And as we talk about the need for Black jurors, there's obviously a need for Black attorneys. And I'm just curious, as a Black man, a Black attorney, how are you doing? You obviously are professional, you're studying this case, but it's got to be really traumatic to continuously watch this and be focused on this and have to see this, and not only the overarching narrative of what happened here, but also the horrific videos. And this is not the only one. This was not the only trial happening this year, obviously, whatsoever. And so I'm curious about that.
Brooke, I have been in this fight for 42 years. I wish police departments would put me out of business so I would not have to be suing on behalf of Black, brown, and white people who have been treated unfairly by the cops. But I am encouraged, not discouraged. I'm hopeful for a better day. I love that every day of my life, I can do something to help people's lives and make their lives better. I'm trying to make the LAPD, the county sheriffs, and law enforcement across this nation better, one cop at a time. And I am not discouraged. I am encouraged. I am vigilant. And I'm continuing this fight for justice because it's who I am. It's part of my soul.
Our last question here. I want to go back to the families really quick, because that video of his mother and how, because we don't know, she had a mask on. We don't know if that was rejoicing. We don't know if she was breaking down with tears. You get to see the behind the scenes a lot of the times as a lawyer with families in situations like this. What is the next steps? What do families do after this? Because we see them speak out at press conferences and supporting other families and other victims, but like really what goes on after this? What do you do next as a family member?
That's an important question because people don't understand. The system doesn't make it right. Even though she now has some measure of justice because her son's death was not in vain, even though there's going to be a companion civil case on behalf of the family, either against these individuals or against the county for the role that they play trying to thwart the search for justice, it doesn't make it right. Even if she were awarded $5 or $10 million, she's still going to have a hole in her heart. And she's still going to be a symbol for justice. And it's still never going to be right. So it's important for your listeners to understand, FOXSOUL are going to move on to other stories. Ms. Cooper is going to live with this memory for the rest of her life.
Right. Sad truth to say. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'd love to have you back.
Always a pleasure, and please have me back again.
For sure.
Today is a special day. We have so many exciting guests that are going to be popping in and out, providing their insight, and actually joining us now to discuss the verdict. We have Professor Melina Abdulla. Welcome to the show. We are so happy every single time you come back to the show.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great day to be with you.
Absolutely. So we want to get right to it. What are your thoughts of the verdict that we all have read and seen all over the news today?
Well, one, when I saw the verdict come in, I'm here with my mother and my children, and we just praised God because so many times we've seen injustice, and to see as much justice as a court system could mete it out was really a cause for rejoicing. And it doesn't mean that it's actual justice. Actual justice would mean that Ahmaud Arbery was still alive, right? We have to think about what it means that Miss Wanda Cooper Jones tomorrow will have an empty seat at her Thanksgiving table, that this is not true justice, but it's as much justice as a court system can offer. And I think for so many of us, we've seen injustice. I was bracing myself. I didn't have as much faith as either my mother or Attorney Douglas had in the court system. And I was afraid that the 11 white jurors may win. And, the Michaels and Brian would go free. And that didn't happen. And there is some accountability.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again for joining us today. When I think about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and after that verdict came out, a lot of people had their heads down. But I think about Black Lives Matter, the movement. We have to keep our feet marching. We have to keep moving forward. We did that. We got the verdict that should happen in this situation. But how do you feel as far as being comfortable and sure that they'll be guilty on the next trials coming up for them?
I think we can't be sure of anything until we transform what Dr. Yusef Salaam calls the criminal system of injustice. Right? Until we transform all of these systems that entrench white supremacy, we can't be sure of anything, right? When we think about what happened in the Rittenhouse case. You know, it's been a roller coaster. Last Thursday, we got some semblance of justice, a brief sigh of relief as Julius Jones was not given the death penalty, but remanded to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and compels us to continue to struggle for justice in his name. And then on Friday, we get the Rittenhouse verdict where, you know, this white teenager is seen as a savior of white supremacy, basically, and allowed to kill people who say Black Lives Matter. And then today, we get the outcome that we got with the McMichaels and Brian both being held accountable for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And so it's been a roller coaster. Nothing is assured until we transform systems.
Dr. Abdulla, I want to ask you about, you know, because what this started with, Ahmaud Arbery was killed in February. We didn't get the videotape and find out, you know, nationwide of what happened to him until May, almost more than 2 months after the fact. And we didn't find out from the prosecutor in the case. The prosecutor the initial prosecutor who's now facing charges of her own, but that initial prosecutor recommended no charges for these 3 men. She saw the video, she knew what happened, she recommended no charges. Things didn't change until the world saw the video, and the world saw the video, again, not thanks to any authorities, thanks to a local radio station. I'm curious, you know, from your perspective, can you talk to us, a little bit about the importance of, you know, technology these days?
Well, technology is important, and more than technology is people who are willing to use the tools at their disposal. So the willingness of local media to step up, the willingness of people to organize, the people will remember those who committed to Run with Maud. And even in the midst of the pandemic, thousands and tens of thousands of people across the country took to the streets and said it's not a crime to be a Black man jogging. And so there's the use of technology, but there's the will of the people to use the tools at their disposal. So we are grateful for everyone who organized and marched and prayed and posted and ran with Maud. We're grateful for all of them, because that's really what it took to bring this case to trial and to win the outcome that we won today.
Dr. Melina, when we first started this show, The Black Report, you were one of our first guests, and you referred us to a civil rights attorney, Lee Merritt. And he was talking about this case, and in part, he's a big part of why it caught the national attention. And we know that came from the protests that were led by Black Lives Matter. I want you to talk to us about the power of protest and the power of making change, because this really started because Black Lives Matter showed up for George Floyd, and then we heard about Breonna Taylor, and then we heard about Ahmaud Arbery, and then you have the attorneys like Ben Crump, you have the Lee Merritts, the Sue Ann Robinsons. Talk to us about this network that has been created, just like the new civil rights movement, and how effective the power of protest and having allies and working together, because you all share in this moment right here.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for lifting that up. And thank you for providing a platform from the beginning for Black Lives Matter to be able to get our message out and say, you know, everybody, we need you in these streets, right? So Black Lives Matter is really building on a long history of Black freedom struggle that began from the moments Black people were stolen from the shores of Africa. We never submitted to our own oppression. And so Black Lives Matter is just regular people. I'm just a regular mom of 3 kids, right? We're just, you know, Sister Jan was a school bus driver, right? We're just regular people who said we don't have to submit to these injustices. And more than that, it's actually our sacred duty to step into this work and to struggle for and fight for a world that's fitting our children and the generations to come. And so we're grateful. And more than that, than just the folks who are part of the Black Lives Matter movement. We're also grateful for those who walked before. There was a woman profiled, if you watch, the news coverage of today, a sister named Miss Polite, who is 87 years old and who has been at the Ahmaud Arbery trial every single day from jury selection to today. And when she was interviewed, the reporter said, "How long have you been in this fight?" And she's 87 years old, and she said, 87 years. And so we're grateful for mothers and grandmothers like Miss Polite, like my own mother, like all of those who refuse to submit to injustice and who are struggling for a better world. We have a saying in Black Lives Matter that when we fight, we win. Today is a testament to the truism of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've had conversation with friends. So when the police showed up to the scene where Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, no one got arrested that day. And a lot of people feel like, could that, or is that already leading to a lawsuit down the line that could come?
Well, Mr. Douglas is the great legal mind, so he'd have to be the one to talk with you about lawsuits. I think what it does expose is how every single part of, again, what Dr. Yusef Salaam calls the criminal system of injustice conspires together to entrench white supremacy. So there's discretion at every level. Police have the discretion to make arrests or not make arrests, right? There's discretion about whether or not charges will be filed. There's discretion about what charges will be filed. And then we also, as we celebrate the work of those who stood on the side of justice, of those who took to the streets and prayed, we also have to hold accountable those who attempted to entrench the most vile forms of white supremacy. So we should not forget the name Laura Hogue, who in her closing arguments, it was vile white supremacy when she tried to condemn Ahmaud Arbery and make him responsible for his own death, talking about his khaki shorts and no socks, and that his toenails needed to be trimmed. Those aren't the words that she used, but we cannot forget those who are tethered to a very, very vile and violent system of white supremacy.
Melina, I just have one more question. Attorney Carl Douglas, I don't know if you were watching the show, he pretty much said, we're all going to move on to another story after this. And so, the Black community, I know we look up to Black Lives Matter specifically to help us out with all of our problems, with, to tackle everything pretty much. What kind of hope can we have in situations like this? This is some justice for this family, but we have Breonna Taylor and still so many more outstanding cases that we would like to see justice for as well. What kind of hope can you give our soulmates on the Black Lives Matter side that, we're going to hopefully kind of get some justice in those cases as well?
Right. So we have to breathe in this victory. We have to remember when we fight, we win. We have to think about this moment, right? That we defeated a system that was meant to defeat us. And that should give us inspiration and compel us into greater work. It should affirm the righteousness and the assured victory of our struggle. So we need everyone to commit all we can to Black freedom struggle. And that means getting out in the streets with us. In Los Angeles, we're out in the streets fighting police associations that are really behind this kind of rampant white supremacy. We do that every single Wednesday. So we'll be in the streets this Wednesday. And we're also building new systems, right? That's how we become victorious, is by saying that these old systems don't serve us. And so let's build new ones. And that's what we're doing now with our Black Xmas campaign and police associations campaign. And we need everybody to get in the work and give what you can to this movement.
Before we let you go, you touched on something that I want you to expand on a little bit, because, we're going from protest to pushing policy, to making change. And you brought up the police departments and the police unions. What is the call to action as it relates to beginning to tear down police unions and, systemic racism and white supremacy within police departments? Can you touch on that a little bit about what is the policy move for that as it relates to Black Lives Matter?
Sure. So I'll uplift 2 points. One is that police associations call themselves, well, they don't, but some people call them unions. They are not unions. They are on the opposite side of every other working class person in this country. They only support the very narrow special interests of police. And so we must take them down. For more, people can go to endpoliceassociations.com, endpoliceassociations.com. They're on the opposite side of every policy, of every practice, and they do something that I call pilfering the public purse, right? They gobble up resources that we could be using for actual justice in our neighborhoods. And that's the second point. We have to demand that when we say defund the police, what we really mean is we want dollars, our tax dollars, to go to things like after school programs, like housing, like quality jobs programs, all of those things that actually mean safe communities, not to police. And so don't be scared out of saying defund the police. We are going to continue to say defund the police. Right. Don't believe these arguments that there's spikes in crime. There are not spikes in crime, as police are trying to say. So we have to continue to say defund the police, end police associations, and give everything we can to the building of Black freedom struggle. We invite everybody to join in Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, not only there's no increase in violent crime, but you could count maybe on one hand the major police departments in this country over the past couple years that have been defunded at all. The two major, biggest police budgets in our nation have been refunded. They're pushing to give them more money, more police officers, but the narrative doesn't match that. And so let's stay on that topic before we let you go, because you know, obviously the message is that Black people, not even the message, the fact is the stats show that Black Americans are disproportionately punished for crimes in this country, right? And so what we've seen from many activists is a push to overhaul the entire system in an effort to change that in so many different aspects of that. And so we are in this space where you're just talking about defund the police, but also much more attention is being paid to prison abolition, right? And so changing the carceral system overall. But I know, of course, that that does not at all mean that violent murderers don't face any sort of punishment whatsoever. And so I want to hear from your perspective, someone, you know, at the front of this push for a more equitable system. What is an appropriate punishment in this case? 3 violent murderers who chased down a man and killed him, and they will at the very least spend the rest of their lives in prison. You know, is that appropriate in this case?
Right. So it's this survival pending revolution, right? We want a system that invests on the front end, that makes sure that we prevent these murders. And we started off this conversation by saying this actually is not justice for Ahmaud Arbery. Justice for Ahmaud Arbery would mean that he's still alive, right? And that's what you're pointing to, that an abolitionist approach is making sure that we have ethnic studies in our schools, making sure that we root out white supremacy and violent white supremacy. We wish we could have stopped the McMichaels and Brian from killing Ahmaud Arbery. That would have been the best outcome. However, as long as we have prisons and jails, we should have white supremacists and police who kill our people be the first ones in them, right? Yeah. As we work to topple these systems. And so I think it's really, really important that we lift that up, that we continue to struggle, and that we understand that the justice is brought by toppling the systems altogether and investing in the things that actually keep communities safe.
I agree. I just want to say that's a huge takeaway. As long as we have prisons and jails, we should have violent white supremacists in them.
Yeah, that is so true. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a great Thanksgiving, and thank you again for joining us here on Fox Soul's Black Report.